Hello, my name is Amy, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Trihydro's TSCA Compliance Update, What You Need to Know for 2023 and Beyond. Our speaker today is Andrew Paulies. He will be providing information on the changes within TSCA reporting, as well as discussing the TSCA developments and updates, the 2024 CDR requirements, and the new PFAS reporting rule. We're excited to get started today, but I'd like to cover some housekeeping items first. First of all attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have questions at any point during our time together today, please use the Questions tab in your GoToWebinar attendee panel. We'll save a few minutes at the end of our session today for a Q&A with our speaker, Andrew. If we don't get to your questions during our time together, we'll answer them directly via email after the webinar. This webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available after the webinar, and we will email it to you within a week. Finally, you'll have an opportunity to complete a survey after the webinar is done. It will only take you just a few minutes, and if you could take time to fill it out, your responses help us create valuable webinar experiences for you in the future. And with that, I'll introduce our speaker today. Andrew is a board-certified regulatory toxicologist in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He specializes in developing and implementing risk-based strategies for contaminated site assessment and closure. He also keeps tabs on environmental regulations impacting industry, including rulemaking activities for contaminants of emerging concern, such as PFAS, and outside work. He enjoys sailing, reading obscure sci-fi books, and fixing vintage machinery. Andrew, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome to all of you to our comprehensive TSCA updates webinar. And the objectives for our get-together today are shown on the screen, but from very, very high level perspective, as I go through the general aspects as well as detailed findings on the latest and greatest, I think we would like to start with overall refresher on TSCA, particularly as it applies to industrial substances compliance. The second overarching theme would indeed to share with you all the latest, specifically 2023's activities under this rule. And finally, from the practical perspective, I'd like to help you with getting ready for the upcoming TSCA reporting, and not just under CDR, because we're going to be talking about two final rules for PFAS and asbestos, which have separate independent reporting requirements, and details we provided. Next slide, Amy. Next slide after that. Thank you. So when we think about TSCA, just recall that this is the principal rule for industrial chemical safety in the US. And the main intent of the rule is to identify and then control any unreasonable risks deemed so by EPA. So if you can remember that principal primary objective, then that'll help you to understand all the activities behind this rule in the past and recently. Next slide, please. Also, I would like to point out that between its inception in 1976 and then significant reform in 2016, a lot has changed. And this rule refresher has significantly wider breadth of influence, but also the activities under it are much different that they ever were under the formal rule. And looking at the present statistics, there are nearly 87, or maybe even now over 87,000 industrial and consumer chemicals on the inventory. And also another aspect to remember is that this rule is not expected to slow down anytime, certainly not in 2024. Next slide. There are multiple environmental compliance rules in the US. So, and there's a division between them. So while food, drugs, cosmetics, pesticides are handled by FDA or FIFRA or other rules, all the rest, all the other industrial chemical substances tend to fall under TSCA. So it's almost like a catch-all rule for regulations. And one aspect also to remember is with the reform TSCA, the agency, and some of these aspects will be shown in the discussions on, for example, PFAS and asbestos. Agency under the new chemicals review is implementing the zero risk tolerance and more for those substances that need review by EPA. And then, as I mentioned before, 2024 definitely will be continued implementation and enhancement of the TSCA rule. Next slide. When we talk about the TSCA, the global inventory, there are two flavors within it. And that's important because there's distinction between the inactive substances, and frequently they come with the legacy or the grandfather TSCA inventory. And then now that designation also includes active compounds. And this split is about evenly looking at the latest statistics. And one item to keep in mind from the compliance perspective is that while active, designated active chemicals are allowed in the US commerce, those that are deemed or identified as inactive of inventory, they will require Form B or 90-day activation notice before commercial activity can proceed. So that's another nuance of compliance with TSCA from the general perspective. Next slide, Amy. And then before we get into the specific updates of the final rules and then subsequently provide the CDR refresher, reporting refresher, and other mechanisms that I think anyone practicing in TSCA should remember is this reformed TSCA staging process. And those are demonstrated on the inserted graphic. And the objective of the reformed TSCA is to take the former, the old inventory, with the new chemical assessments that are coming in on a regular basis, and then end up with a safer inventory according to EPA. And one more focus item, next slide, is just to look at closer at the third stage in this process. And that's stage 3. That's the evaluation stage. And within it, we have 7 steps. And this will actually provide bearings as to the 2023 activity summary I will focus on in the section 2 of this webinar. So Amy, next slide, please. Next slide. All right, so I have divided the various 2023 activities in this main 4 stages that the reformed TSCA is operating under. Under stage 1 reset, there were none. In fact, the reset rule was completed in October 2018. Those who had commercial activity around that time were required to designate active, inactive substances. And that task has been completed. And at this time, the reset rule, as we call it, is dormant. Yet EPA, I believe, has the ability to reactivate at some point down the road, but we don't see it happening next year. Under the stage 2 prioritization, and this concerns the 2016 original high priority substance designees, we have activity on about 7 out of the 20. And I'm not going to go through each and every line, but essentially these encompass a combination of flame retardant solvents, some of them are chlorinated solvents, and then there's a mineral, asbestos. And under the other statutory designation of low priority substances, that was the other 20 that EPA has to keep on the docket. There was no activities this year. Next slide, please. So this is where it gets a little more detailed now, because now we're looking at activities under the stage 3 evaluation. And those are listed here. We have test orders for PFAS in plastics. Then asbestos, I'm going to talk about the asbestos rule later on. The one for dioxane, experience revised risk evaluation. And the next bullet is interesting because that foreshadows what EPA's thoughts are on conducting risk evaluations. So typically EPA conducts evaluations on chemical by chemical basis, and then any adverse effects and impacts are viewed individually according to the chemical. But now we're looking at the cumulative risk assessment proposed approach. And granted, this is for phthalates, but I believe EPA may want to try this for other chemicals, maybe even PFAS, which typically operate as a mixture. Another aspect of interest is that, yes, there is greater interest in PFAS in general, and now EPA is looking at the new PFAS risk evaluation framework. And finally, this is not a new development, but the new approach methodologies for reduction of vertebrate animal testing is still very much promoted by EPA. Next slide, please. And in this stage, this is the final stage in the overall EPA's evaluation cycle. And this is where the environmental regulations take shape, and they are proposed for finalization or revisions. So under the subsections of proposed and final, you can see the items listed. And under the proposed section, we have the proposed prohibitions for chrysolite asbestos, methylene chloride, tetrachloroethylene, and trichloroethylene. Another interesting development is that, if you recall from the earlier slide, parties have the 90-day notice period for activation of inactive compounds. Well, EPA is proposing that they would block that reactivation of specifically of PFAS without a new risk evaluation. So you can see there's tightening of that interest in PFAS still. And another theme that will be clearly apparent in the final PFAS reporting rule for, and then asbestos reporting rule as well, is the removal exemptions. And in this case, this is removal of the low volume exposure exemptions for PBTs and PFAS. But as I will outline in next section, there's additional exemptions that are no longer available that traditionally were. And then switching quickly to the final, in the interest of keeping moving, we have quite a bit of material to focus on today. There's that known CBI health safety data dissemination, electric tools for CBS submittal, indication for EPA, and then the last two items I will cover in detail. So with this, that's the update on 2023 activities under TSCA. So Amy, let's switch to the next section. If you want to click through, one more click. And this is a very, very, very interesting rule. A lot of the TSCA practitioners, experts, have a lot of thought about how EPA is going about it. But I will let you make your own judgment as we go through some of these components here. Now, I will not go into any details on PFAS themselves, other than that indicating that this group of fluorinated compounds, by the way, used for decades in industry and consumer goods, are now subject to increased regulations on a state and federal level. And this is mainly due to realization of the persistence, bioaccumulation properties, some of the longer chain compounds, and also allegedly toxic properties. So EPA has a lot of activity devoted to PFAS, not just under TSCA, but numerous environmental rules. So a quick overview of the final rule. It is a new reporting burden. I think this is for the first time that EPA is looking at such comprehensive reporting of PFAS dating all the way back to January 2011. So it's a very, very long look back period. And in my recollection, other than the CDR, which goes back 4 years, so it's a 4-year quadrennial cycle, I do not recall the agency requesting such a long look back period. It has complications. For example, some of the archiving rules are inconsistent with this look back period, but EPA forged on nevertheless. Another aspect that's extremely interesting is that because of the complexities and the group size of PFAS, EPA would like to look at least 1,500 individual PFAS species and then the associated uses. So the breadth and scope of that request is tremendous. And a consequence of this rule also is that unlike parties that are familiar with CDR reporting every 4 years, under this rule, there will be parties not previous to CDR reporting or any kinds of reporting may need to report under the PFAS reporting rule or PFR. And similar to CDX, there will be a central data exchange or CDX portal to submit the information in 2025. And I'll provide the deadlines for all of you later on. So in terms of the affected entities, yes, we have the standard commercial manufacturers, importers, and that involves not only current but former. So if you had manufactured or imported one of the 1,500 PFAS compounds in the last 10, 11 years, you are subject to reporting. Now, this also entails importers of non-municipal solid waste. Now, The municipal solid waste, by rule, on the other hand, is exempt. And there's added entities, and here are the NAICS codes listed. But I think one has to be careful whether or not they're subject to this rule. And one final aspect on the slide is that if the PFAS compounds within that 1500 number scope has already been imported or otherwise handled previously, then there's no obligation for reporting. Next slide. So this is getting a little more detailed now. So here's the information that EPA is asking for. Somewhat familiar to what CDR reports are asking for. The chemical identity, molecular structure, which for some PFAS may be challenging, categories of use, the quantities produced of each substance or mixture, then a description of byproducts, disposal information, then any information on adverse impacts of human health and environment, the number of individuals, frequently workers exposed, and so on and such. So it's not surprising the amount of information or the type of information EPA is asking for. Now, one thing to remember is that there's two types of reporting forms, but then each form is for each reportable PFAS. So there could be quite a few forms or mixtures or articles as well. And that's another new development aspects in this rule, is that now articles are subject to reporting if the PFAS are known to be contained there. And then each site creates their own reports unless it's the importer. In that case, next slide, Amy, that's the usually the highest order of corporate organization that's listed in EPA. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, not so fast. I think this is a bit of a consternation to the experts, is that EPA is asking for a universe of up to 1,500 chemicals, yet the agency is not providing comprehensive, discrete lists of these compounds. They do provide a chemical structure formula, there's 3 of them, but really there isn't no specificity. And I believe the guidance documentation is indicating that the users may refer to Comp Talks dashboard or Appendix C of the reporting instructions, and I give the document there. But again, it's not an exhaustive, comprehensive catalog. So ultimately, each potentially impacted party has to look at their PFAS inventory and determine PFR applicability, which is quite challenging, especially for those not accustomed to TSCA, not accustomed to TSCA reporting, not familiar with the very complex PFAS chemistry and such. So it is a tall challenge. Next slide. So talking about the challenges, I did mention before that EPA is trending in terms of removing the standard TSCA exemptions. So in the past, typically small businesses were exempt, but that exemption is no longer available with the PFAS final rule. In the past, also, industries or importers were not required to report if there was certain quantitative thresholds met. For example, in CDR, it's 25,000 pounds per year. In this case, there's no exemptions for that. No exemptions for byproducts, impurities, non-isolate intermediaries, polymers, mixtures, commercial research and development, and imported articles. That's the final that will likely encompass greater number of reportees. Next slide. It's moving quickly, time check, very good. So still, second page of challenges. I mentioned before, very, very large number of PFAS compounds, many of them have not been reported previously. So there will be a tremendous challenge. And EPA is saying in the rule that even if one is in the position of environmental health and human health effects data, that might be subject to reporting as well, even if this is prior to January 1st, 2011. So that's even outside the look back period. And looking at some other aspects, it's a long, long list. But without a doubt, this amount of detailed or requested information is rather unprecedented. And for the value chain reporting, I do not believe that PFAS are understood or even known to be in products, let alone tracked along the value chain before it gets into the US. So definitely a deep thought will be required as to how to obtain these data for EPA. Next slide. It's not necessarily doom and gloom. There's some mitigating factors. It is a one-time event. This rule will be over with once the reports are submitted in 2025. And there's the streamlined reporting availability for the articles. Commercial research development, if the amount is less than 10 kilograms per year, in that streamlined reporting, there's optional information fields. And then if one does not know the exact amount of PFAS in the articles, then just report the overall article mass or counts. And I guess EPA will figure out the amount of PFAS that may be coming in or manufactured. Now, duplicate reporting, that was a big, many commenters indicated that we already are reporting this information under different programs, for example, TRI or CDR in years past. And it's not obligatory. However, when you look closer at the amount of and extent of detail that the PFR is requiring and what was required in the past with all exemptions, the overlap is minimal. So in fact, the PFR is much more onerous. So might as well report. There's also some exemption for non-commercial research and development and importation, as I mentioned before, of municipal solid waste for disposal destruction. There's also exemption for non-chemical substance under TSCA. There's a definition there. And also, even if PFAS is found in mixtures, the other components are not subject to reporting on this rule. If parties choose to do so because of CBI or other reasons, they may submit joint application submissions. And if anything is confidential, there's that CBI availability. As I also mentioned last time, just like any other TSCA rule, the record-keeping requirement is 5 years. And then the last bullet, actually extremely important, and let's talk about it in the next slide. So this is a TSCA standing reporting standard. So in the first bullet, you can see that in quotation, not known to or reasonably ascertainable by in persons, submitters, possession, control, or knowledge. Now, the caveat is that EPA is indicating that I guess the manufacturer, importer, or other regulated party would reasonably search for the information, but not only within the organization's purview, but also up and down this value chain to fulfill that PFR duty. So recommendation is that parties that are subject to this rule should fulfill the due diligence for searching, retrieving, and requesting required information. And by doing so, they will engage with the value chain partners. But it's very important to archive all these activities. In the case of audit, you need to demonstrate to EPA auditor that you have performed your duty, the due diligence. So that NKRA is available, but only after you do your best, so to speak, to retrieve the information the best you can. So there's a nuance to it, fine line, but that reporting standard is available. Next slide. All right, so in terms of the burden, parties impacted, and the rule indicates certain NAICS codes. However, under the second bullet, under 40 CFR 705, 10, and 12, additional activities and parties may be impacted. So the recommendation is to look very, very carefully at that section and make a rule applicability determination. And if you like, you can contact EPA. They'll be willing to do so. If you're not comfortable with getting agency word on that, contact your favorite consultant or legal advice, environmental lawyers, TSCA lawyers, and they'll be able to help you out with that. In the end, in the rule, and EPA went back and forth how many respondents are potentially impacted by this rule, but you can see the number is quite high, not only in terms of the number of responders, but also the yearly, annual million hours required to comply with this rule. Next slide. I was trying to compare and contrast this rule with CDR. And in general, it's similar. I think anybody who has undertaken CDR reporting, there will be familiarity. But one thing that will strike you, and I said it many times, it's much, much more complicated, more involved. And then the look back period. Definitely, we're already having difficulties retrieving information 4 years back. Dating it back beyond 4 years, looking for it, may be even more difficult because personnel changes, departments change, ownership of the companies change, and archives get purged or otherwise become inaccessible. So no doubt it would be much more difficult to obtain information that far back. Right? And then finally, the lack of availability of those exemptions definitely increases the scope compared to regular CDR. All right, so that's next slide, Amy, is the final slide for the section 3. Then we're going to move on to the next. We're doing really good on time. Thank you. So here are the top 3 takeaways. It's a brand new reporting rule with extended look back period for information sought. Tremendous number of PFAS compounds known and lesser known compounds to report. And if you dabble with PFAS, you could probably find CAS numbers for those compounds, maybe trade names, but others may not have CAS numbers, or they may be confidential. So accession numbers will be needed, or in some cases, there may be very little information on not at all. And then finally, on the third item there, I think that, and I'm not sure how this may be communicated to the parties that may need to report, but they don't realize that they need to. there's going to be a greater number of business entities having to report come in 2025. So the regulatory impact statement is right there. Not going to say anything about that. You can read it, and Amy indicated you will retain a copy of the slide deck for your own use. But one thing to keep in mind is that failure to comply with the rule will be a violation and subject to penalties. I think that occurs all the time. And then finally, the reporting deadline for reference. There's two sets of deadline. The large manufacturers, importers, it's May 8, 2025. And the small entities, and there's a business side definition under 40 CFR 704.3. They have a little more time to report. But in the end, that's not that much time, because 2023 is almost over. And then 12 months next year, you're going to need each and every month to retain information, look for it, determine if it's subject to the rule, try to figure out which PFAS you have within your inventory articles, lodge inquiries with your value chain members. I'm sure there will be refusals, or folks will not respond right away. So that's not that much time. And then the first round is coming up in May. So again, that's not much time for this. So I guess the recommendation is to start extremely early. At least start with the determination whether or not your organization may need to fall under this one-time reporting rule for PFAS. So thank you, Amy. This is end of section 3. Now we're going to move to section 4. And that's section 406. So you're doing really good on the overall progress here. And we may have time for questions. If we don't, please email them or put them in the chat window. And I guarantee you, we will respond to each and every inquiry that you may have as a result of this presentation, or later on as you kind of digest and think about these rules. Say, you know what, I have a question. You have my information, call me or text me or email me anytime you like. Right, so this is the second final rule that was published this year. Again, this is another one of those one-time reporting rules. So it seems that there seems to be developing a pattern with EPA that EPA seems to be information hungry. And what's interesting about this rule that's maybe different from, in some way, from the PFAS one-time reporting rule is that not only manufacturers, importers, but also EPA is calling out the processors. So that's one more aspect of the activity that's very, very much called out under this rule. Now, they do have a revenue limit for those entities, which is a type of exemption according to the business size, and that's positive. And then in terms of the data requested, that's pretty well standard with what we see in the CDR. So that concerns the quantities produced, processed, types of use, worker and exposure information. And you can see that the look back period 2019, 2022. So that's a quite reasonable look back period. And the next bullet is indicating not only asbestos-containing products, articles, but also those that include natural substances. And then impurities, and including as mixtures. There are more exemptions available under the asbestos rule compared to PFAS, but still there's a trend of reducing of the standard TSCA exemptions here as well. The NKRA reporting standard applies, and CBI claims are available as well. And just about anything else with EPA these days, reports will be due by May 2024 via CDX, and there will be 2 separate forms available for the responders. And the next slide gives a little bit of overview of what Form A will look like. And that form is to be used by small manufacturers, importers, processors of a specific type of group of asbestos compounds. And that's called the Libby amphibole asbestos. So only that type of asbestos, the grouping of, can use that reduced Form A. If you are a research and developer in small quantities, you may use that form. And also, if you happen to come across the non-iso intermediaries aspect. And another aspect, utility of that form is that if you don't have the full extent of the data requirements that are subject to Form B, so asbestos quantities manufactured, imported, processed, you may use this form as well. Okay, let's look at the Form B, Amy, next slide. So this is the standard form. And this is for the large manufacturers, importers, processors. And this is for any form of asbestos, even Libby amphibole. And then you have full information available to report to EPA. Next slide. We're going a little quicker. We need to still get through the Section 5. Here are the asbestos types listed under the rules. So there's the general CAS number, and there's 6 specific CAS numbers. And then as indicated, Libby amphibole is composed of the 3 other CAS number only asbestos compounds. Next slide. I'm going to move a little quicker now. Here's the information that's requested. Fairly reasonable. I think it's a long list compared to some of the other requirements elsewhere. But I think that this information should be available to most entities. Next slide, Amy. In terms of the top 3 takeaways, again, we're looking at one-time reporting rule. This time with a little bit more compact look-back period. Typically, all asbestos forms are subject to reporting except the Libby amphibole. And this is very much looking like CDR data request. And then there's the deadline for you to keep track of, which is just around the corner. It's not much time at all, coming up in May 24. All right, Amy, let's focus on the last larger section. We have about 15 minutes remaining. Next slide, and this is a quick refresher of your standard CDR reporting that's performed quadrennial. I'll go through it very quickly. Number 1, it may be already information people are familiar with. I'm just going to stop and point out some of the important aspects, if it's new, or a little bit compare and contrast with those one-time reporting rules. But in the end, my intent is go through the section fairly quickly. And again, you have a set of these slides for your own use. So we're looking at next reporting cycle. EPA has issued Federal Register notice that now officially the reporting period is from June 1st, 2024 through September 30th, 2024. And that will be subject to years 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023 calendar years. If you did this last time, last reporting was 2020 and it covered the other 4 years back. So in this case, this is a standard traditional approach. We talk about threshold exemptions. 25,000 pounds typically. That's the annual production for each chemical subject to potential reporting. And then we're looking at both manufacturing and importing. It's one and the same under TSCA for commercial purposes. And also keep in mind that each facility, each production facility has to report, but for importers, as I mentioned before, it's the highest corporate organization level that puts their name down on the report. Now, what's new, unlike the last reporting cycle in 2020, which these OECD codes were optional, now they become mandatory. So that's one major change from the last 2020 reporting. Next slide. All right, so here's a quick summary of which chemicals to consider. Individual compounds, bulk compounds with specific cast names, numbers, UVCBs subject to reporting, mixtures, alloy solutions. What's excluded, and I mentioned it before, there's other rules that control, otherwise regulate food, drugs, medical devices, cosmetics, so they're not subject to reporting. Next slide, exemptions. And here's the full list of what typically we see as TSCA practitioners exemptions. So polymers, microorganisms, certain listed forms of natural gas, non-iso intermediates, they're exempt. But in the previous one-time reporting rule under for PFAS, it's not. Byproducts, exempt. Impurities, exempt. R&D substances, exempt. And then if they imported a part of an article, they're exempt, yet under PFAS reporting rule, they're not exempt. So it can be quite confusing. You need to pay attention. Which rule are you talking about? And then spam manufacturers are exempt under CDR, yet under the PFAS reporting rule, they're not. Okay. So next slide. Here's some partial exemption. So what it means that you don't have to report all the required information, just some of it. And then you have those two types of compounds or groups of compounds listed that have only partial reporting requirements. Next slide. All right, so if you're going to prepare CDR database for the site, this is the information you're going to need. Mention the threshold exemptions. And also, we have the concept of the principal year for which extra information, so custom use information, is required. So this year will be 2023. That's the principal years. And then that's standard, right? NKRA standards. So that also applies here. So what is known or reasonable ascertainable information? Okay. And then PDI also is available. Next slide. In terms of the processing data, here's the list. I'm sure this is very familiar to most of you. I'm not going to go through much detail on that. And those are the data elements required. Next slide, in terms of the uses. So we're looking at the type of uses, sectors that use, for that use. Then we look at the production volume for each type of use, number of sites, and so on and so on. So go ahead, next slide. Just going through quickly. So we're going to be submitting the Form U, although we haven't seen actual Form U in a long time. Although you will see it if you print your CDR report from CDX. And the CDR CDX reporting tool, if I can call it that, it's quite friendly. I know last time when we did this in 2020, that the reporting tool was being rolled out. There was beta testing, and I think EPA is going to have another beta testing exercise for the updated reporting tool, but it's straightforward, it's interactive, has very nice pull-down menus. You can search for cast name, cast numbers and such. And also, because it's all electronic, you can have multiple individuals involved. You can have your agent, your consultant, you can have your organization designees enter the information, but only the primary author's official may certify and submit the report as final to EPA. Okay. Next slide, real quickly. All right, so like with any of these, talking about the PFAS reporting rule, certainly the asbestos reporting rule, and now CDR, because there's so much data requirement there. And also you need archives and you need volumes, information, uses, workers, and such. Start early. We can never stress the fact that folks may be thinking, oh, it's every 4 years, or I still have to 2025 to think about it. Well, no, because there's a lot of delays in getting information to you. So we can never overemphasize the importance of starting the CDS early. And because of that, there's the multi-stakeholder effort required. You need to get with your procurement, your process engineers, your marketing folks, R&D, and legal as well. So definitely a lot of time and effort is being put in. It's also important to QA/QC your data before they entered into the CDX. And then also keep in mind, I mentioned this, that for the next reporting cycle, EPA is looking to update the chemical data reporting guidance, finagle with its reporting tool, and that hasn't been announced. I checked it this morning. There has been no announcements on it yet. Next slide, just a couple aside one aside slide is that the necessity to keep in mind that agencies performing audits. Therefore, the record keeping is extremely important. So just about any scrub information could help you in terms of responding to an audit request. And then, as I mentioned before, by the rule, you need to keep your archives, records, backups at least 5 years. Not sure what your own institutional or organization records keeping retention policy is, but hopefully it entails the 5 years that TSCA requires. Now, in terms of typical pitfalls in reporting or audit findings is underreporting. Mainly because you may not have the information, or you're not aware the information is reportable, or you didn't think that maybe it's okay not to report everything. Well, I think the advice I would have to any of my clients, and I do, is that you might always want to over-report. There is no penalty necessarily for over-reporting to EPA on TSCA, but certainly there is complications if you do not report something that EPA would deem was reportable. So it's better to provide more information than less. There's also the challenges with the chemical nomenclature issues. Is this the cast number I'm supposed to be using, or this is the chemical name I'm supposed to be using? I thought that was okay, but in the end, it has to be just the right chemical name that EPA will accept. And I think the CDR reporting tool, the online version now, will help you because you can search the SRS database directly for the right nomenclature. And then record keeping. I think that's something that can be managed within the institution. So with this, Amy, I think this is the end of section 5, CDR refresher. And now we have about 5 minutes left for just a retrospective summary of what's going on. So next slide. So here's the summary. So the TSCA rule program, whichever you want to call it, is quite active under the 2016 reform rule. And I don't think that that's going to slow down anytime. It has been and will be the industrial chemical workhorse for EPA, and definitely increasingly used to assess existing and certainly regulate the priority chemicals. If you recall from the first section, we have the 20 high priority substances, circa 2016 designation, and then you have the 20 low priority substances. So there's definitely a lot of activity within that. And also recall that a lot of these 20 HPSs are nearing completion. So they're entering that last stage 4 cycle, and then EPA will be picking additional compounds to replace those, because by statute they have to have 20 high priority and 20 low priority substance on the docket at any time. Okay. And as you can maybe appreciate through the summaries are provided for the one-time reporting rule, and this is not the only environmental program that we see this, is that EPA has heightened focus on substances that the agency deems as unsafe. And now, with the elimination of the exemptions, now we have byproducts and impurities being incorporated into the reporting as well. And that reporting will be used by EPA to assess any management, any risk management requirements down the road. And because of those one-time reporting rules, in addition to the existing rules that we have on the TRI or EPCA or others and CDR, we can see that the agency has increased appetite for information. That's very, very apparent. And unlike previous reporting, which the smaller business entities were not asked to participate, now we're seeing those small entities also being party to the rules. Okay. And then the last 2 bullets I'd like to leave the audience with is that let's not wait in terms of making way for the 2024 CDRs and the one-timers, call them the one-timers, the reporting rules for PFAS and especially asbestos. And also I've been on the lookout for any updates. EPA has indicated in their Federal Register, which was published in June, that not only they're announcing the formal reporting window for CDR, but also indicated they'll be updating some of the guidance and also will be updating the reporting tool in CDX. So with this, I believe we have 2 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, I'll be prepared to entertain those for a minute or 2 minutes or so.
Thank you, Andrew. We did have a couple questions come through the question panel. I think we'll start out with one of those questions. And like we mentioned before, if we don't get to your questions in our time together today, we'd be happy to answer them over email after the webinar is complete. What is the reporting requirement for a facility that only has PFAS containing AFFF stage for disposal?
Okay, if you may repeat the question. So facility only has, yes?
Yeah, so what is the reporting requirement for a facility that only has PFAS containing AFFF stage for disposal?
I do not believe that there will be any requirements for that, because if you think about TSCA, TSCA is concerned with manufacturing, so essentially generating a new chemical compound. And in this case, it seems the facility is not de facto creating any new PFAS compounds or even byproducts thereof or impurities. So I believe there will be no TSCA requirements. However, if you'd like me to dig a little deeper and provide you with the rule citations, please give me your contact information and I can reply with a formal assessment of that question.
That sounds great. We have a couple other questions, but we approached our time together. It's 1 o'clock on the dot, so in respect to other people's time and busy schedules, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Again, we will answer these questions that were submitted over email after the webinar's over. If you have additional questions, please be sure to fill out our exit survey. There's an opportunity to, in the survey, to request some one-on-one time together to discuss your interests further. Also, a recording of today's webinar will be delivered to your inbox over the next week. And if you'd like to learn more about TriHydro, please feel free to visit us on trihydro.com. Andrew's contact information is on your screen right now. Feel free to reach out to him individually. He'd be happy to answer any questions or fill you in on some additional information that wasn't covered today with regards to TSCA. Of course, he covered it all, it seemed like, in great detail. But thank you again for joining us today. We hope you all have a safe and wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.